Welcome back, fellow riders. You're currently with me on board my Husqvarna 501 Rallye in the Wattigan State Forest in Australia, and I'm hitting some flowing single trail. It's liberating being out on a bike so light and agile, and I'm accidentally returning to my enduro roots. But hang on a minute, this bike was built for adventure. Just have a look at that tower hanging off the front of the bike. She's been with me slightly more than a year now. Time to reflect on how successful I was at turning this enduro weapon into an adventure slayer.
In my last video, we did a warts and all review of my Husky 701 that I've had for 3 years, and I voted that the best bike for what I want in the garage. But saddling up beside it is my Husky 2023 501 that's now been with me a year, purpose-built for adventure. So today is very much about talking about this bike and what it brings to the table, and do I have any regrets? Again, it's going to be a warts and all review of this bike, but I'm going to also add a little bit extra for you, and that's a comparison between how I see this bike and how I see that bike. Because there's a couple of you out there saying, oh Dave, I don't know, what do I get between the 701 and the 501? Hi, my name's Dave Darcy and you're watching Motorcycle Adventure Dirtbike TV. Now we do 3 things on this channel. We do cracking good bike builds, very thorough tests and reviews of bikes, and finally, and arguably the best thing we do, is long-form motorcycle adventure movies from all over the world. So if you like Mad TV, for goodness sake, subscribe.
So let's zip back to where it all kicked off and dive into the idea behind this build. Believe it or not, the inspiration for this project was a quirky mix of potatoes and mate envy.
If you get a twin, I want you to think about potatoes. This is a 4-kilogram packet of potatoes, right? And when you buy a twin, even if it's at 190 kilograms, and they're much heavier than that, you're looking at between 20 and 25 bags, 4-kilogram bags of potatoes on top of what you see here. So lightness, as I'm getting older, that's another thing that's really important to me. The final thing is, what are your mates riding? And I've got to say, I've got a bit of envy. Nugget's got a 500, Mark's built a 500, it just has to be done.
And so this is what I've ended up with, a bike I carry around on the back of the car. If I can avoid freeway miles on this bike, I will. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The biggest one is the effect it has on my Tate.
Good morning, fellow riders. After a couple of weeks on the 701, I'm back on the 501. And for those not familiar with anatomy, this is my first observation. The 501 vibrates, and I've got this vibration coming up through my Tate. And you might ask, where's your Tate? Well, your Tate is that little bit of skin between your anus and your scrotum, and the vibration's just coming straight up through there, straight through the seat. And it's funny, I didn't anticipate that would be my first observation, but the 701 is such a well-balanced engine with very little vibration.
The 501 build rests on the foundations of lightweight, comfort, carrying capacity and fuel range. Specifically designed for those tougher, week-long camping adventures, but capable of taking you further than that if you want. I had specific adventures in mind, including the desert, the Victorian high country, and the more challenging terrain along the east coast of Australia.
So, up the front, it's got an adventure man cave tower. It's got bark busters, but they're open-ended. It's got an IMS fuel tank that gives it close to 350 kilometres range. It's got a seat concept seat. It's got a true North Motos rack, and it's got an adventure bike components extended oil cover that increases oil capacity. But the best modification to this bike is its K-Tech suspension. It's an off-road valve system, and it's 300 mils of travel on the front, 300 on the back, and they've been fitted out with the K-Tech system, and it just completely changes the bike. The strength of it is that it soaks up the little stuff, but when you take those big hits, it soaks them up beautifully as well. So that was arguably the strength of this bike. Oh, one more thing, the flippy mirrors. And the thing I like about them is that when it gets tough, you can just flip them in, and then when you get back on the road, you flip them back out and they're in the same position. So you don't have to stuff around with your mirrors. So a great little modification. They're nothing, but they do well. But there are some regrets I have. And the first that came out pretty obviously yesterday is the fueling of the bike. It tends to stall. It just flames out. And unfortunately yesterday it flamed out on a very vulnerable, precarious rocky ledge. And let's have a look at the results of that.
It's the poor tradesman that blames his tools, but when in that single trail or more technical stuff, stalling is a regular occurrence for me.
Damn it! Oh, yeah, there's that stall again. I don't know if that's a flame out or me. Oh, fuck.
My mate's recently opted for an ECU remap by Fuel Talk in Queensland, and the results speak volumes. It's not just about fixing a problem, it's about unleashing a whole new level of performance. My mates report no more nerve-wracking stalls just when you need the power the most. The flame-out issue, well, that's gone, and all this comes with only a slight bump in fuel consumption. It's a game changer, ensuring safer and more exhilarating rides in the tough stuff. As of today, I've posted off my ECU to be remapped and looking forward to experiencing the results when it's posted back to me in a week or two.
A couple of other things became obvious yesterday. I think I'm going to go for some bar risers. I mean, when you're trail riding, it's best not to have bar risers, but when you're adventure riding, it just allows you to stand up a little bit straighter. I think I'm very tempted. I think I'm going to go to 20 mil or 30 mil bar risers on the bike. Now, a controversial decision on this bike is the Pirelli rear tyre, which is a 140, and it's really big. And if anything, this bike becomes over-tired with it. On adventure riding, it's brilliant. It's a great tyre to have, but when it gets tough and you're in single trail and you want to give it a bit of a squirt, what you'll find is the rear tyre pushes you through tight corners and it stops you turning into the corner. So it's a bit of a compromise. Do I have any regrets putting the big tyre on it? No, I don't. I mean, on balance, you know, in the desert sand, I think it's going to be good. I think in most circumstances it's going to be good, but I just make you aware of that. The other one is the fitment of the Adventure Man Cave Tower. Now, that's great. It's got excellent lighting and it puts my GPS right up high so I'm not looking down, and they were the two features I was chasing. But what it does do is, because there's no clearance, I can't get proper bark busters, the ones that, you know, are closed-ended that protect everything. And yeah, I kind of regret that, but it's a tossing and turning sort of feeling about it because, you know, this tower is actually light and it works well. Yeah. The front end is really confidence inspiring. Yeah, basically just the suspension allows you to move through the forest very efficiently.
So, as promised, time to compare my 501 to my 701 to assist potential buyers who are tossing up between the two. In the top right hand corner of the screen there is a link to my previous video where I declare the 701 is my ultimate adventure mount. I'll also put links to the 501 bike build. The 701 is a brilliant dirt oriented dual sports bike, but for the tough stuff, the 501 shines.
But it's funny riding the two bikes, you know, just end to end, you can really see the difference. And what's the other obvious differences straight away? It's the steering and the handling of the bikes. This bike is so much more responsive. But not only that, the bike weighs a good 20 kilograms lighter than that bike fuel full. This one comes in at 141 kilograms, but most importantly, most of that weight is down low. And so you've got a lower weight and a lower center of gravity. So this bike is incredibly responsive. You can be coming up to something and an obstacle and you can quickly change your body position and the bike responds instantly and reliably. The 701 has a tendency to keep going straight ahead. There's a resistance to turning it that's noticeable when you get on the two bikes. So if you want something that's flickable and usable, then the 501's the one for you. If you move between these, and it's just as simple as if you just move the bike from backwards and forwards and sideways, you'll feel that center of gravity and weight, like it's quite pronounced. You can really feel it, particularly in that first movement. There is a big difference in weight. So if you want a light bike, and that's important to you, there is a huge difference between these two bikes. The 701 has some advantages though. It's a much more refined bike. It has a much more powerful front brake than this one. The front brake on this 501 is crap. Rear brake's all right, but the front brake lacks feel, lacks power, and is one of the weaknesses of this bike. The next thing is cruise speed. This bike happily sits on 110, 120. You can do that all day, probably even 140 if you wanted to. Well, on the 501, I find myself sitting on around 95 to 100 with the standard gearing. I don't want to change the gearing. The gearing is perfect for what it is. But the 701 certainly has that capacity to cruise comfortably at a much higher speed. Arguably one of the biggest differences on these two bikes that I noticed in the bush yesterday was the suspension. The 501 suspension just completely blasts the 701 suspension out of the water. There's such a huge difference. This is pretty non-compliant in that first, few centimetres of stroke. And not only does that affect you when you're riding long distances, but it also affects you when you're in gnarly stuff and you're punching along, because the front wheel has a tendency to break traction. Whereas with this bike, the front suspension makes that front wheel track like glue to the road. It's just amazing. Doesn't matter the conditions, it just sits there and very unlikely to have washout. Fuel range. Fuel range on this bike is probably 100 kilometres less than the 501. That tank is ideal for this bike, and if fuel range is an issue for you, then you're either going to do bladders or you're going to have to extend your fuel tanks for the 701. The 501 done up like that has great fuel range, 350 k's out of the tank, so that's excellent. I think after that huge rap I gave the 701 in our last video, why would I be keeping the 501? Well, that all became apparent to me yesterday when I was out in the bush. I can still do tight technical single trail. I can genuinely explore, knowing that if I fall over I can just pick the bike up myself. And it was just really liberating. I came back with a smile on my face. It's such a capable bike, and this one's going to continue to stay in the garage. I mean, the funny thing with it is that for most of the trips it's going to be on the back of the Subaru, and then we get to the actual location where we're going to ride and then I'm going to unload it. But that aside, it's a cracking bike, and the two have different purposes, and this one's not going anywhere. I'm really happy with it, but as I said, I've got to fix that flame out issue. Yeah, so to sum it up really, really quickly, this is light, powerful, meant for the tough stuff, meant for those particularly challenging trails. But you know what, it's got a low service interval. You're looking at 1,000 k's. You could probably extend it out. I mean, I'd be willing to go 2,000 k's with one oil change, maybe a bit of a daredevil there. And this bike, you can ride 10,000 kilometre service intervals, but you're going to pay the tax. It's a bit heavier, but the engine is more refined and more balanced. It's slower to respond in the tough stuff, but it's still a highly capable bike. And it is a off-road oriented dual sporter, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, if you want to do the tough stuff, go down this path, but get used to changing your oil, because that's what you're going to do. This is just a big trail bike set up for adventure, and this one is a true dual sport bike. I think it's really important to be upfront with you in terms of where I'm getting the parts and what I'm paying. And I'll be frank with you, I'm not paying anything for the parts. These companies, I've approached them and they've provided the parts to me to make this build. But it's not that someone has just said, oh, here, have a free part. It doesn't work like that. I'm not interested in that. I have sought those manufacturers out, those suppliers out, because that's what I want on this bike to make this bike the best. So yes, I am being provided the parts free of charge, but they're parts that I've selected. And I think that's a very important difference. It's just not what people are pushing onto me. And there's no money changing hands in terms of what I put on this bike. This is my build and I can do as I want, and I'm free to do as I want.